Heya, hope you're doing alright. I'm Tom, and I'm currently reading off a script, because rather than rambling, I thought I'd actually just, actually say something during the time that we're gonna be going over this book, How to Read a Book. Got my notepad here, and I've got some notes in here talking about what we're going to be looking at. And yeah, as you can see, I've started writing scripts for my videos, just starting with this one, so you probably haven't seen that with anything else. You're only just learning that right now as my eyes just slowly flick up like that. And so my eyes are going to do that a lot. I realised that, well, my script may detract from me talking and being what I am in that moment, and may limit the spontaneous expressions I may otherwise have exhibited. I realised that rambling on for long periods of time without really saying much doesn't really get across what I want to get across anyway, so it doesn't matter. Yeah. Besides, even if you're only watching a video of me being able to spontaneously articulate what I'm on about, you're only seeing a slither of my time living. Oh, there was a Facebook notification right there. And even if it's impossible. There's another one right there as well, as you've already heard, anyway. But I can't even articulate everything I'm on about all the time anyway, so it doesn't really matter. What you're going to get is an image of me that isn't entirely true, because it can never be entirely true. I can't make a documentary of my whole life and even respond and talk about my internal thoughts all the time anyway, so no matter what you get, it's going to be like an image. So I might as well edit it, and I might as well articulate it into something I want to say, rather than try and just be natural, because we can't access natural. So there's the first bit. So that was the intro over with, the intro to the actual video. Now we've got to do the intro to the actual book. Now, why am I doing this book in particular? I'm doing this book because one of my friends told me that when they read this, they were able to remember twice the amount of information that they could remember from other books. And this friend is pretty clever as well, he reads pretty widely, so I was like, why not do that as well? But why am I reading this book, and why am I doing a video on this book in the first place? Well, there's, I guess, two sides to this. There's, on the one hand, it gives you guys the ability to perhaps learn something new, or be given an introduction into a book, and on the other hand, it also allows me to be able to articulate and consolidate the things I've read into shorter messages for me to then be able to do what I want with. In the future, when I reference books that I've been reading, it means that you can actually go and see that as well, and you can see what I'm referencing and talking about when I'm talking about that. Now, perhaps with other books, I could actually talk about the context in which this was made, I suppose it's built, and I could talk about a million other things. This is, like the conditions and the mindset that people were in, but I'm lazy, I don't want to do any of that. This is my first one, so, I'm just going to allow myself not to have to do any of that. Besides, later on in this anyway, they're going to explain some of this stuff anyway. Part 1, the preface. Now we've talked about why I'm reading it, and we've tried to answer those questions, we've potentially got to ask another question, which is, well, why were they even writing it? By the way, there we go, those are the people who read it. Oh no, read it? Well, I suppose they must have read it, but they also wrote it. And we've got to ask, why are they writing it? And, well, this is what they try and answer. My edition is from 2014, But when they're talking about it, they're talking about how it was first published in 1940. So, you know, the first version was then published then. This is the second version, which was published in 1972. So it's been 32 years since the last one that they did, and that's pretty amazing. Like, so why do they need to expand on it and redo it this way? And they say it's because they've got to add some new things to it. He needed to address his critics far more, because there were some that came back to him after, or came back to Mortimer J. Alder, the original writer of the book. And they also added, because he teamed up with Charles Van Doren, as well, as you saw there, and he teamed up with him to also add some extra areas to the book. Part 1, the dimensions of reading. So this part of the book is meant to be talking about the kind of background context that we need, and the kind of things that we need to do in order to be able to read really well. This kind of lays out, lots of different things, but we'll get into that as we go along. The kind of main idea you can think about is that, while we're not actually going to really learn like loads of the proper techniques that we need to do, we're going to learn about the ones that we need to know before we know those things. And so this part 1 that I'm going to do here of this book is going to be only about that kind of background information, but it's going to still be needed, because in order to read really well and actually get to the real meat of the book, we're still going to have this appetizer, because like, I don't know, if you're, say, driving a car, you need to know how a traffic light works, you need to know how a zebra crossing works, and you need to know how pavements work before you can even know how to drive a car, because you don't even know where to drive it. You don't have that background information for how to do the driving really well. So what is this background information that we need to know from them? Well, the first thing that they say is that this book is for people who want to expand their understanding, and less so about people who want to expand the information they know. So what's the difference between these? Why would they even need to make a distinction? Well, I kind of came up with my own analogy for this, and it's that of a fishing net. Now, when you think of a fishing net, you will often think of kind of either a group of strings, or just maybe even just one string, weaved together to create a kind of net shape. Now, when we think about it in this way, we can think of each of the points where the string crosses over as a piece of information, and we can think of the string itself as the understanding. Now, what I mean by all of this is that information tells you little things like, a date when someone's born, how fast a car can go, I don't know, what the weather is like outside. These are almost facts, or they're just kind of descriptions of something. What you need to know behind that is understanding. Now, if you don't even have the understanding of what speed is, or what a car is, then you don't know, then me saying, oh, you can go 120 miles per hour on this car, it just doesn't make any sense. In this sense, understanding is what allows us to even have information. And this is why they want to allow us to kind of have this is why they want us to have our understanding expanded. Because when our understanding is expanded, the amount of information that we can take in is then equally expanded. In this way, you can start putting together, and you can read a book for information. You can certainly do that, but it's the actual understanding that's really going to be able to make you have in in the metaphor of the net, more string allows you to have a larger net, meaning you can potentially make more connections and more information from that. Next, they talk about the idea of passive reading. Now, what actually is reading? They say that we often think about reading as being something that's quite passive. We just sit there, we just read along, we just go like that, and we're just like, and that's all reading is. It's a passive experience because we're like a hoover and we just suck up the information as it comes at us, or the understanding as it comes at us, and then that's it. They say this is a bit dumb because there are some readers who can actually remember things a lot easier, and then there are other readers which can't. And the difference there is the activity, it's the actions that people are taking. The reason why one reader can probably remember more and another can remember less, apart from maybe being due to kind of cognitive issues or things, it's also because of how active a person is. Now they prefer the analogy of a catcher. In a game of, rounders or baseball or whatever, the catcher's role is to try and catch the ball. Now, we can think about this in the same way, that when we're reading a book, all the bits of information, all the bits of understanding are like balls being thrown up and or being hit off the bat, and it's our job to try and do all the different techniques that will allow us to be able to catch the ball really easily and be able to, get the person out in the game. What they say is that the thing that determines how well we can actually catch the ball is how well we can perform the actions, such as the bring our hands down as the ball goes in, the positioning of our feet and body, and all these things. These are all different skills that make up the actual catching of the ball. And so just like there are all these little skills that make up the total action, there are a lot of different skills and actions that we can perform in order to make up the total action of catching the information that's in a book. What are these actions? They're not really going to tell us until the second part. They're going to give a couple of hints and they're going to give us a few bits, but the real meat's going to be probably in the next bit from what I've seen. Another thing they tell us to do in this part is they want us to read in discovery mode rather than an instruction mode. Now the way we might think about this is maybe through the idea of, Lego. So when you're playing with Lego, you can discover things, you can work it out for yourself, and you can put the bricks together without any instructions or without anything, and you can just start putting them together and you discover yourself the nature of the blocks. You discover what bits can fit together, how things can be rotated and fit into one another, and you get new ways of being able to kind of mix and match with the Lego bricks. But if you're reading from the instructions, you're kind of being told how to do everything beforehand. You might start learning about the nature of the bricks and how they fit together, but that's always limited both by what the instructions are trying to get you to do, and also by the fact that you're not really curious, you're not experimenting. You're having to stick to a strict line of what to do and what not to do. Now, this isn't to say that instructions are bad. I used to have a lot of Lego when I was younger, and I really loved the fact that I could just sit there mindlessly and just match up all the instructions and just do the bricks that way, and that's fine. But when we're reading and we're doing it in a way of discovering, and when we're doing this with most things in life, the fact that we have to use our mind and discover these things and learn about them ourselves makes it far more active rather than just following something step by step. This is something that perhaps our schools don't do as well. They don't allow us to discover, they don't allow us to experiment and challenge and come up with new ways of doing things. Instead, due to the time and due to standardization, we have to follow a kind of set line, because that's the best way of working out how valid people are in our current situation to do certain jobs, apparently. Now we can talk about, the school system some other time, because I've read jack shit on all of it. I really don't know anything. I just maybe standardization isn't the best thing for everyone, especially how everyone's so different. The ultimate thing as well with discovery is that it kind of goes with the old saying of, you can take a horse to water, but you can't make the horse drink. The kind of idea is, even if you had a teacher there who's giving you the instructions on how to read a book, even if they pick up your finger and they drag it across the page, and even if they read out the words aloud to you, it's only you who's actually going to intake that. They can't get inside your brain and then program it over into your brain. Now when I say that, I'm not saying that you should never use a teacher. And sometimes you might be incredibly stuck and you might just need that teacher, and that's probably fine. And they're just encouraging us more so to let go of the teacher's hand and work it out for ourselves. Now, there's the next bit that they go on to, which is the different levels of reading. If we're going to be reading, and if people are going to be taking in different information, then perhaps we could say that there are different levels to reading. There are different abilities to do different things in reading. And they lay out 4 different ways that we can read. The lowest level is elementary reading, and this is when we learn to actually physically do the reading. This requires our brains to be ready, our physical eyes and reading materials to be ready there, and our willingness to actually be able to start learning how to read these symbols and interpret their meaning. The second part is inspectional reading. Now, inspectional reading is the type of reading that you'll do when you've got a limited amount of time and you don't have enough time to actually read the whole thing, and so you need to pick and choose parts of the book that will potentially give you a broader understanding about what the book even is about. The third level, which is what the second part will probably take up, is analytical reading. Now this is the type of reading that is proper, as the way they see it. This is the proper meat of the book. And then finally, level 4 is synoptical reading. And synoptical reading is the type of reading where you're kind of cross-reading. You're reading other books and trying to point out links between them. Now each part of the reading takes everything that the lower level did and just pluses something on. If you're going to be doing inspectional reading, you've got to have elementary reading there, because you've got to know how to even read the physical book, just like with analytical reading. Analytical reading takes what inspectional reading does, which is also what elementary reading does, and does both of those and a bit more. Next, he's going to go into a bit more detail about what these were. With elementary, by he I mean both of the authors. Here. In elementary reading, they start talking about kind of the way schools work, and they kind of give just a general overview about the process. I'm not going to get into it here because no one has the time for that. And as well, if this sounds like it'll be a good piece of information for you, I'd recommend you also read this for yourself. And so I'm going to leave out some pieces of information from this book, because then ultimately it won't be that you just read or you just hear this summary that I'm giving and then go off. My summary excludes things in the book that if you actually read the book, you're going to get. And so I don't want you just to read the summary and hear nothing else. They say that in school, you're only going to really learn about elementary reading. It's only until you probably get to about master's degree, which is about 20 years of education, that you're actually going to be able to get up to synoptical reading, the 4th level. Once we actually know what elementary reading is, which is just the bare bones of it, it's just what does it say on the page? Does it say, like, and trying to actually link those symbols to meaning, like the cat sat on the mat. It doesn't really matter anything about it, it's just about actually knowing what those symbols mean and being able to link it up. Now we move on to inspectional reading. Inspectional reading, as I said, is when you don't have enough time to do what you want to do. This will aim to try and do 2 things. 1, inspectional reading will tell you what type of book it is, whether it's an autobiography, whether it's a play, whether it's a set of instructions. But 2, inspectional reading is going to also tell you whether it's worth reading. Now, in general, there might be some books which on first glance actually will have a lot more to say in it that you won't be able to get from inspectional reading. But inspectional reading will kind of give you a general feel for whether it is worth analytical reading or not. And if it is, then we'll be able to get into that. Okay, so if elementary reading, if in order to do elementary reading, you just need to read what's on the actual thing. What's inspectional reading? Like, what do you have to do in order to do inspectional reading? You have to do 2 things. You have to do pre-reading, which is also called systematic skimming, and you have to do superficial reading. What's pre-reading? Pre-reading, you look over short parts of the book that might tell you quite valid information about what the book is about, or what are the kind of main ideas around it. In order to do this effectively, they've suggested some ways that you can just have a general look over the book just to see if it's worth your time, or if it's got the information you might be pretty valuable. And they list some suggestions for this. 1. Read the title covers and preface. With this book, we can look at the front and we can say, okay, well, yeah, seems pretty decent. It's got a quote up there from someone, and it's also got the title. It says, to the intelligent reader, the classic guide to the intelligent reader, and it also has the authors. From this initial glance, we also have a back page, as well, which tells us some things. And then also tells us the price as well. Now this will tell you what type of book it looks like. This is the very, very quickest thing. You could probably do this in about 10 seconds. You could probably guess roughly around what it is, but we've got to do more than that. 2, look at the table of contents. What is its overall structure? Now, if you're like me, I got to this stage and went, oh shit, and then turned to the actual pages of the content, to the actual table of contents in this. If we were to view this first, we see that there's publisher information, all that stuff, and now we have the contents. So we've already gone over the preface, we're in part 1, and what we can notice is that, firstly, the whole book is divided up into 4 parts. Part 1 documents the dimensions of reading, as I said. We can see here that it goes over the activities, the art of active reading, and all that stuff that we went over before. Then moves on to the levels of reading, which we've also talked about. And it's talking about the second level of reading, which we're talking about right now. We can also see by this that we're also then going to go into how to be a demanding reader later on. And that's also why I didn't lay out the actual contents earlier on, because I kind of wanted to make it a bit, a bit how I initially read this. We can see by this overall that maybe when you first came into this book you really had no clue. I was just throwing all these different concepts and ideas at you that they'd thought, and that isn't that good. Like, it just kind of bewilders you. If you actually read the contents page and you can start getting like a general idea of the structure, and maybe dipping in and out and seeing what each of these actually mean, like what do they actually mean by X-raying a book, which you probably can't see there. It allows you to know where you are and where you're going to get to and what you're going to go through during the journey of reading the book. And ever since I've read that, it's just become a habit in me that I actually do just, read the contents pages, and I do that in everything. Number 3, you want to check the index, and you want to check for what's often repeated, or what are the kind of things that are brought up that seem to be repeated quite a lot. So, I don't know, let's do this with H.P. Lovecraft's the classic horror stories. That's a collection of his works. And if we turn to the index, which is here, there is none. There is no index. So that was a terrible idea. Funnily enough, all the books I'm trying to show you actually to try and show you an index. Funnily enough, all the ones I'm showing you don't even have it really. But this is where we can use the table of contents again, for instance with this one about Spinoza, and we can use this to see if it even has an index in the first place. Alright, I actually found a book that actually has an index. This one by Jeremy Breacher, I think that's his name, right? Yeah, Save the Humans. It's a pretty interesting book so far. I've only read 7 pages into it, but as we can see from the table of contents, that it has, if it's ever going to load, an index. And if we look, for instance, we can see things like, AIDS during campaign. That's brought up a couple of times. Though only twice really actually. We can see anti-war movement. That's brought up a couple of times as well. We can also see here the Arab Spring, that was brought up a couple of times at the start. You can see here as well, the Battle of Seattle is brought up a few times, particularly kind of dispersed towards kind of those top bits there. Civil rights movement brought up again, or brought up rather. John R. I don't know if their actual name is John R. Commons, or if it was to do with, presumably it's to do with, I don't know. Particularly here, democratization movements, and that's brought up a few times. But yeah, so that tells you a lot about what the book's going to actually talk about. It's going to talk about a lot of resistance and a lot of kind of the movements of the past, and yeah, that's pretty cool. 4, check the blurb. I don't know if any of these have a blurb, but I know they say that's worth doing. Once you've done those 4 things, you can then move on to 2 other things that are more in depth. You want to look at the passages, which seem pretty pivotal to the whole thing. With the example of Deleuze's book on Spinoza, we might see that, while it's not pivotal, if we look at the amount of numbers on each of these things, you can see that on the table of contents, we kind of get some kind of life of him. We also get these kind of background bits, and then the real meat of the book is between here. That's the index of his ideas. And so what we can see is that's pretty important to its whole structure. It's going to kind of, those bits before are likely going to give us context towards Spinoza's work. With this one, we could look at its main structure. It might seem here, for instance, where they talk about social ecology, and then they then go on to talk about capitalist modernity. It seems like those two would be linked, as this one's talking about the nature between humanity, the relationship between humanity and nature, and then this one is talking about the crisis, which, of course, crisis is something which fundamentally changes the way a kind of thing is organised, and so that would perhaps be a pivotal moment in the nature between humanity, in the relationship between humanity and nature. Yeah, so they say look at the bits that seem pretty important, and particularly read the start and ends of those pivotal moments, because they'll generally kind of give overall summaries of what's came before in the book and then what's to come after. And also read the end of it, because the end of the whole book, because they're probably going to try and give you some kind of totalizing summary of the whole book, and that's kind of just, that's just kind of telling you sort of what they see as maybe perhaps important in the book as well. And then the sixth thing, I can't count, is to just dip into random pages here and there. Don't try and read more than like a couple of pages, maybe even just a few paragraphs in lots of different places, and then I don't know, that's what they say to do, apparently. So if you want to take their advice, you're welcome to, but if you don't want to, you're a free man, or woman, or non-binary person. Okay, so that was pre-skimming the book. That's when you're just, you're taking little kind of parts of the book. But now we've got to talk about the superficial reading, which is the second part to inspectional reading. Right, so as you can see, it's got darker. It's been about a couple of hours, maybe 3 or maybe 2, since I last recorded. And so that's kind of quite weird, I suppose. Now what they say superficial reading is they say it's about just going through a book and just not really stopping. Just taking your way through the book and just going through everything, and when you get to points that are very hard to understand, or when you just don't get what's going on, it's to just power on through. Just don't get yourself bogged down in it, because later on in the book you'll actually understand what's going on, or you will just not get there. But they say it's better to go through a whole book and only remember like half of it than to get stuck maybe a quarter of the way through it and then never be able to finish it because you were just so stuck. They say that some areas will be probably harder to understand than others, but if you eventually get to the end of it, some things might also be revealed to you. You can apply the same ideas to a sentence. Like, if you try and get bogged down into working out what a single word in a sentence means, you might just never get further than that. Sometimes you've just got to have a vague understanding of what the thing is, and then look around and follow the rest of it, and then you find out what it's really saying, or you see it in a different light, and then it'll work. Some people also asked about speed reading, because they published their original book, and then people asked about speed reading and why, if this was any good or anything. And they say the speed reading is good, but it depends on what you're using speed reading for. Speed reading itself is only improving elementary reading. If you're doing these speed reading courses, that's fine, that's great. But it isn't going to change anything apart from the elementary reading level. They in fact actually argue that one of the ways that they say that you can improve your speed reading is if, say, when we're on this, whatever page, is if you just get your finger and you just trace over the words, but you do it quicker than the actual, then you're kind of being able to read it word for word. And in that way you actually kind of focus more. And it also means that you actually get to speed through the book and you actually get to go quite quickly. Which for someone like me, who this took like probably a month or two just to get to like this stage, because I'm just such a slow reader, that's definitely needed. Alright, as you've probably worked out by now, there's the final stage, and that's part 5. As we saw earlier on, it's how to be a demanding reader, and these are where they're just telling us just the extra little bits that we need to know, or we don't need to know, but you know, we can know in order to be a better reader. Now, one of the best ways, they say, to be a demanding reader is to ask questions when you're going along. If something doesn't seem to add up for you, then just, you know, ask the question. They specifically say to usually use the top and the bottoms and tops of pages in order to kind of write your questions, and then hopefully come later on and go, aha, that's where they answer it. Because, asking questions is the only way that you're kind of going to be able to kind of rewrite what they said in your own ways. And so they've kind of divided these different like types of questions you can ask into 4 types, and each one needs to be answered after the other as you're going throughout the book. The first one, and I came up with an acronym, if that's the right word, for these, which is A.H.I.S. The first one is A, about. What is the book about? What are they trying to say? What is being taken throughout the book and tried to be spread along, and then they're saying this thing does this, has these effects, these are maybe some problems with it or something. What is that they're talking about in it? For these guys, it's reading, surprisingly or not. Well, at least, yeah, and comprehension of reading and stuff like that. But whereas with other people, there might even not be any inherent kind of meaning that's shared between all of them. There might even be individual chapters that are just about different things. And in that case, you can say about, what is it about? Or you can say, well, it's about a number of different things. In other works, you might even say it's less about kind of this one particular thing, but it might be concepts that are attached to one another, perhaps. So yeah, number 1, A, about. The next one is H, which is how. How does the reader bring these things that they're talking about across? How are they saying it? What kind of arguments are they bringing forward? What kind of analogies are they bringing forward? Are the analogies good? Are the arguments good? And what's the structure for what they're saying? And yeah, what is their backup for what they're saying? Is it true in any way, or is it false? That brings you to number 3, which I kind of just alluded to anyway, which was I. Is it true? Like, is what they're saying, does it make sense? Like, can you see it really being true? Beyond you seeing on the face of it being true, is it empirically true? Is the things that you're looking out for true? Is it true overall? Like, is everything they're saying completely great and perfect and good? Or are there any parts that are true, and where there are the parts where it's not true, are those the parts where it kind of goes off track? And then, yeah. And then S, at the end of it, is, so what? Like, why should I care about this? Should I care about it as me, as the reader? Is there a particular group of people that this is meant to appeal to? Does any of this have any relevance to the moment? And that isn't to say, oh yes it does or it doesn't, but like, how can this impact society? Is this a book that could really impact the world in an incredible way, or is this a book that's already done that? Or is it a book that has no relevance at all? Is it a book that is not even interesting or not even like worth anyone seeing? Is this a book that also why would a reader read it? What can they get out of it? What can you get out of it? What have you gotten out of it? And why has it been written in the first place as well? So to recap that, there's 4 different types of questions you kind of got to answer in succession as you're going along. And they spell A.H.I.S. I don't know, I just kind of came up with it. But yeah, what's it about? How are they structuring and how are they arguing it? And what analogies are they using and ideas? Are these true? Is it true? Is it right? And so what? Where does that matter? Right, okay, so we've done all of that so far. We've looked at all the different levels of reading, well not all of them, but we've just looked at elementary and inspectional reading. We've gone over the 2 components of inspectional reading. We've gone over the characteristics before all of that of reading and what is the best type of reading to do, or like what are the best aims for reading in a way. Rather like how you should go about your reading, what are the approaches you should take. And now we're going to get to the final part, kind of, or almost, which is what type of notes you should take when you're going along with this. Now, they generally say that you can use any of these types. You don't have to just like earlier on, these are all suggestions about what types of notes you can take, but everyone will find some that are better or worse for them, and some of these have definitely been ones that I've seen and I thought would be really, really good. I will be using in the future, potentially. And so, here are the different types of notes that you can make. Interesting, I know. How interesting is all of this? 1, underlying or circling, or I don't know, doing little funny fuzzy boxes around things. And these are usually to highlight around particular subjects or particular sentences or particular things that have been pointed out and then their effects. This might be some statistics, some facts, some dates, some whatever you want like that. Vertical lines. Now, vertical lines you can use for kind of more lengthy things. So, for instance, here there was a really good paragraph I read here, and I decided to do a vertical line rather than highlight every single bit of that because, some things require a whole paragraph just to explain, and that's how they work out pretty well. Number 3, it says up there, is stars or asterisks. Now they say, in order to divide these things from circling and highlighting stuff, only put a star where it's incredibly important. In fact, only put about maybe even just 10 stars at the very most throughout the whole of the book. Particularly because so this divides the things that are kind of important or quite good to remember from the things that are very crucial. You could put these as kind of parts that are even pivotal moments. These points of there is a change or a new way of looking at things, or even just a sentiment or theme which is seen as really important in the book. And then number 4, numbers at the margin. So the reason why you use numbers is to structure things. So if they're talking about a process that's going on, you might want to just put numbers at the margin just to be able to see each step and kind of divide that out in your head. Or if it's an argument, you might also want to do the same. You might want to also structure in that way, so you can take each one bit when you come later back to it and look and break up each of the individual parts to further study them. I'm definitely going to use that, and I hadn't even thought about that when I first read it. Number 5, numbers of other pages. Now, if there's this would be quite good for themes, I guess, because this is where you can bring back other moments in the book, or maybe even moments in the future of the book, where you're saying a particular thing, and you kind of want to get across that message of that particular thing. It's a way to cross-reference parts of the book, and maybe even to kind of say, well, this happened in this moment, and now this is happening in this moment, what's the difference between them, and then working out how it's changed and developed, or how it's grown and done something else during the time you've been reading. Which is also another way, documenting the way concepts change and grow and move throughout the book. And number 6, use the top and bottom of the books to ask questions and answer them in very quick ways, which I've already said. This is just, and you can also use this to explain kind of hard parts of the book. If there's been like a solid, maybe a solid paragraph of information, if you can try and work out a way how to just write that all out in a sentence as its central points, it just really helps. It can also mean that when you're flicking back through it later on, you're actually, you can just check the top bits and you can go, aha, so this page was about that thing, or this page was about that thing, which, I don't know, that might be quite good as well. I think I might use that as well, quite a lot. Yeah, and so that's what they choose. They use those 6 underlying and then vertical lines as well for particular paragraphs. Stars for really important parts in the book. Numbers to show processes. Numbers of other pages for cross-references. And maybe even other books. And then also kind of using the top and bottom of books to kind of summarize what's on that page or what's going through this thing currently. Now each of these can be used in different ways, and those correlate to the types of reading, or the types of levels of reading you're doing. If you're doing elementary reading, you might just want to, underline things that kind of you don't understand the terminology, and underlying it is able to then you're kind of able to look that up in a dictionary or work out what it means later on in the book, and you'll understand what that thing means. Once you've got to that stage, or once you've looked up in a dictionary or whatever. That's elementary reading, and how you can use notes for that. Then with inspectional reading, inspectional reading is about trying to get the general idea, the general shape of the book, if you will, without getting into any of the nitty-gritty details. So as you're just trying to get the bare bones structure out of a book, and you're trying to just see a kind of general feel for how it will be when you go into analytical reading, if you even do that. Therefore, when you're looking for structure, which you usually will be with inspectional reading, you'll use them kind of structurally. So you might use the numbers at the margin, or you might use the kind of underlying to talk about the main components, the main beams in the structure of the whole house of the book. And then analytical is about conceptual notes, because analytical is maybe more about trying to highlight the main themes, the main concepts, the main kind of things that are trying to be highlighted and talked about in the book. Concepts, the actual particular things that are wanting or meaning to be highlighted. And then with synoptical reading, as your kind of comparative reading, as you could also call it, you're doing dialectical type of notes. Now, dialectical type of notes, I reckon from that, what they mean is that you then take some concepts from one book, and you'd take some concepts from another book, and you'd synthesize them into one synthesis through the dialectical process. But they just say that they're going to get to this later on, so I guess we'll get to it and we'll actually understand how that is done, and how we can do it ourselves, which might be hopefully pretty cool. And then here's the final thing that they go on to in this part. They talk about the habit of reading. Now, like with any art, there are particular skills that will become kind of apparent when you're doing the art, that in order for you to be able to kind of do really good art, you typically have to execute them really well, or have to have an understanding of how they go. Now, it could be said that it's pretty easy to be able to there is the chance that a good piece of art may be made randomly, or it may be even made from a person's intuition. I used to think that if I just sat down and I just drawed a couple of things, or if I just did a couple of pieces of music or something, just the randomness and the kind of pure kind of lack of strict form would allow something beautiful to come out, because it's a void, it's away from any traditional structures. And while that can still happen, and there's probably definitely art which is great and subversive, or even not even subversive, but just great anyway, it still helps to have an understanding of the different skills that go into art. If you're painting a picture, you can certainly wait for the perfect picture to come about, just from you randomly experimenting and stuff, which is fine. But you can also learn the different ways people did it in the past. You can learn about all the different individual actions, such as the types of brush strokes, or the type of canvas, or the type of materials, or the type of paints that you use, or the ways you, sweep the paintbrush, I don't know, or the amount of water you put on. And these are all different individual actions which go into building the larger structure of the whole painting process. Another thing might be, football. Football, you've got a series of different skills you've got to kind of mediate between, and you've got to say how intense you want that skill to go. Whether you're running fast, as that's a high intensity of running, or a less intense running, when you're running with the ball, or when you're running to get the ball, or when you're running away from the ball. I don't know. Maybe if you're like me and you're a bit of a chicken. And so you kind of get this, when you're trying to do good art, you're trying to kind of mediate between different skills and try and do them less or more intensely than other things. How intense do you want the colours on your canvas to be? How intense do you want the merger of different colours to be? Do you want it to be kind of watery and dreary? How intense do you want your brush strokes to be? Do you want them to be hard, full of energy, or do you want them to be kind of light and delicate? Going back to sports, and they use the example of skiing. You've got to mediate between how intense you want to do all the individual actions in skiing. I haven't done skiing before, but I imagine, you've got to work on how intense you want your turns to be down different slopes. Yeah. So, perhaps this is one idea of what art is. It's about doing a series of different skills. So, in skiing, this may be turning, speeding up, or accelerating or decelerating, jumping, being heavier or lighter, going down more vertical or more, flat surfaces, I don't know, I haven't done skiing before, but this is the kind of general thing. You've got to mediate between each of these different things. Do you want to turn that quickly? Do you want to combine your turning that quickly with slowing down? And it's all about these, you can kind of think about all these different actions that you've got to take a part of on sliders, between, I'll stand here and you could potentially think of this like this. You'd have like a slider for how fast you want to turn. And do you want to go slowly? Or do you want to go rather roughly? Do you want to go fast or slow when you do that? Do you want to be light, or do you want to be really heavy and down to the ground? Do you want to be going over flat surfaces or wobbly surfaces? Or there's so many different things that you've got to choose between. That's what makes up the art. And they say that in order to be a great skier or a great painter or a great, music player, you've got to work out all these skills and work out the right intensity for each one at the right time so that they all work together perfectly to get you what you want. And in this way, we can see reading books the same way. We've got to work out how intense we want our reading speed to be. We've got to work out how intense we want to be into looking at the individual words or the larger sentences. And all these individual skills, which we're probably going to learn in the next one and apply however intensely we want, all these have got to be mediated in the right way to work about to bring forward a really good understanding of a book. You can kind of think in the same way that when you get really good at football or when you get really good at an art or whatever, all these individual skills which you've individually learnt slowly to do, like you don't learn how to speed up and slow down and turn at the same time when you're skiing. You just learn how to speed up and slow down, and then after you've mastered that, you then go to turn, and after you've mastered that, you can try different slopes. And just the same way that once you get all the skills done, and you start to be able to master them and just do them without even thinking about it, they all individually, all these skills merge into one, and then you have skiing. You're no longer just slowing down and speeding up and changing and doing all these things. You're doing them all at the same time. The actual skiing process becomes actually like mediating all these different sliders of intensity of action rather than anything else. In that way. So I think that makes sense. I hope that does. And that's what they say. They say that eventually, if you just learn each of these individual actions that you need to take, or even going back to the analogy of the catching. Now, in order to catch a book well, you've got to have the action of grabbing the book and being able to dissipate the energy that it has when falling. So that's one action. That's one skill. You've got to work out how intense you want to do that. Do you want it to fall into your hands, or do you want to be really rigid with it and it bounce out? Well, the timings that you can get for it. Can you grab your hands around it quickly or slowly? With the movement of your legs, how fast do you want your legs to be? Do you want to go too fast and overrun it, or not fast enough? You've got to try and mediate how fast you run as well. You've got to mediate your hand-eye coordination. And all these things are individual skills and individual things that you have to learn, usually individually. But then when you get really good at it, they just become part of one giant action that you just mediate all these processes in one go. And that's what we've kind of got to do with a reading if we want to be good at it from being educated that way. This isn't to say again that you can't make amazing art without these things. And I completely think that actually, I think art is subjective. I don't think that we can really say anything is great or bad. I think it just depends on the person, how much that thing it does something for the person at that time. So I don't think we can just say, well, it's a matter of just, they have to do these things perfectly, because the perfectness of all of those individual kind of sliders or skills is going to come down to the individual. So perhaps actually art is subjective, but it's down to our opinions on how much of an intensity on each skill we want. And the artist who can master all of the skills at least has a better ability to be able to apply those skills in different ways. It's better than when you know how to best run. It's better than just kind of going off and just being able to master it without thinking, because then you'd know how to teach other people. If you just learnt it from your intuition, when someone asks you how to run, you just go, I don't know, just run in it. But if you had to understand each one and had to work out the skills on your own, and you were conscious of that, and it kind of came from that way, you can kind of go, okay, this is how you run, is you do this, you do that, and you do the other thing. Now this script is about, I don't know. Now while I've been talking for this about maybe more than half an hour already, probably even like 50 minutes by the end of this script itself is, it doesn't say now, but at least from when I wrote it down, this script's probably about 4,000 words or more. Now, this book, at least from what I've even read so far, there's probably about 18,000 words in it that I've read. So there's about 14,000 words which are going missing. So obviously everything I've said here is just, a simplification, a kind of summary of what's going on in the book, from my perspective as well. And I haven't really gone through that much detail on these things. And what I would like to say before I end this is about how they specifically kind of hammered into the fact about how reading is hard. They say, in fact, here on page 48, I think, people go to sleep over good books, not because they are unwilling to make the effort, but because they do not know how to make it. Good books are over your head. They would not be good for you if they were not. And books that are over your head weary you unless you can reach up to them and pull yourself up to their level. It's not the stretching that tires you, but the frustration of stretching unsuccessfully because you lack the skill to stretch effectively. To keep on reading actively, you must not only have the will to do so, but also the skill, the art that enables you to elevate yourself by mastering what at first sight seems to be beyond you. And they bring this up again earlier on as well. The idea is that in order for you actually to understand a piece of work, in order to grow in your understanding, there needs to be a piece of understanding you don't yet have for that to then be added on, and for you to grow and then have that added on. And that's where good books are beyond your understanding. A good book is going to make you struggle. You are going to not work. You are not going to understand what's going on in a lot of the places, because it's going to teach you new understanding, because you're going to have that extra bit of string that's added to your net. And if you already had that piece of string, you already have the understanding. You probably already understand the book entirely. And in that case, if you already know it, you're just kind of reading stuff that you kind of already know. And compared to other books that are out there that could increase your understanding and make you able to see things in a much more kind of wide sense and be able to apply different ideas to different situations, it might be best just not to read those books that give you that bit of information. And maybe just focus on the books that are going to enhance your understanding. That isn't, again, to say just reading for information is bad or anything. It's just that you might be able to do more with more understanding in your life, which can lead to even more understanding of information as well. And so they say all this as well, and so it's okay to feel like a book is too big, if like that tells you that a book is pretty important for you, because it's something that can actually properly change you. And so, as Mark Twain said, apparently, the secret to getting ahead is start. Oh, I think it's the secret to getting ahead is starting. And then he says something else. But it's kind of true. Sometimes you've got to dive in, and you've got to take the plunge, and you've got to understand that you're not going to be able to know all of it, but it's okay, because you can just work at it. And in fact, it's those moments when you get things wrong, they're actually the best. Because unless you're shown that you're getting something wrong, you might be going through your whole life doing something terribly wrong. It's like, thank God, that's a relief that you've told me I was doing something wrong, because now I can actually improve on it, I can actually get better. And I can just not run around like headless chicken doing the wrong thing without anyone telling me it. And just the same way, when we're confronted with something that we can't yet understand, they point out to us our flaws, in a way. They kind of point out what we can work towards and what we can get better at. And that's quite good, actually. I mean, it's pretty terrible and pretty horrible, because it'd be lovely just to be able to walk around and just know everything and do everything and just be perfect at everything. But we're not that. And once we realise we're not that, and we see the potential that mistakes can bring us, we can go, thank God we got that thing wrong. Thank God there was this difficulty or this problem that I was faced with, because it pointed out how I can do things differently. And yeah, if I wasn't faced with that, I mean, you could say at the same time, if I was never faced with it, then I wouldn't go through any difficulties, and that'd be okay. And yeah, that's true. But I don't know. It at least equips you. I don't know. I think Nietzsche said, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, right? And it's the same type of thing. And once you go through some difficulty, you can remember the way you changed yourself to overcome that difficulty, and you have more tools to be able to interpret and get on with the world. You have more tools to be able to tell other people about if they're going through some hard times, and you can go, here's this tool that I used. You can use it as well, potentially, when you're in your situation. And yeah, okay, that was about broader things, but yeah, it's the general thing. Don't be scared by hard books. I know I certainly am. Perhaps this is even just a question, or not question, an answer to me. Perhaps this is just for me to hear. But when you're stuck by a hard book, just do more prodding, do more poking, and it's okay. Like, it is above you. So don't feel bad. In fact, feel good that it's above you, because you know you're doing it right then. And just keep on working at it. And if it doesn't work out, then it doesn't work out. But yeah. Maybe then go back and read some introductory things. Or just drop it for a bit and work on something else. But yeah. That's all I've got to say, really. I hope you are glad that you watched this. I hope this wasn't a waste of your time. And I hope to see you next time. So, yeah. See you.